Hey everyone, welcome back to another AccuColor webinar series. Today we're live on Zoom. We have Yadu, Fereaud, Raph, Nogal, and you may remember them from early in the year. We had one webinar. The ongoing theme is light, so today we have constant lights for dynamic portraits. We're going to have a awesome pre-recorded video, and then we'll take Q&A at the end. Raph, Yadu, welcome.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us. Really excited to share this one with you guys. And obviously, I'm not going to get into it now. You're going to see a lot of that information in the video. But yeah, thanks so much for having us again. We really had a lot of fun making this one.
Yeah, a lot of comparisons, but yeah, we love it. Light is light, and I enjoy the whole process.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, guys. We're going to stick around. We'll have Q&A at the end, so go ahead and send your questions, and we'll answer them live on the webinar. But here we go.
Well, welcome guys. Thank you for having us today. It's our second webinar with BenQ. And my name is Raph Nogal. I've been a professional wedding and portrait photographer since 2009. And I have Yadu Fereaud with me, fashion and portrait photographer. And yeah, today we're talking about sort of continuing on the webinar series about learning about light and understanding light. And we're talking about constant lights today, something that perhaps a lot of you haven't played with. So we want to really show you sort of the differences in the possibilities that you can create with using constant lights. And we'll kind of compare that to studio strobes as well to just give you, show you the differences between those two systems.
Great. So right off the bat, I actually really liked, when I started photography, I really liked constant light, because even as I see, we're currently using this Nanlite 60 that's illuminating both of us. And it's easy for me to look at you and see exactly what the light treatment is doing, and you're seeing it live. So for someone who's learning, that is a great tool. It's kind of like if you have your ProPhoto lights with the modeling lamp on, it gives you an idea. It's not going to show you what the end result's going to look like, but it gives you an idea of how the light is falling, where the shadows are coming in. So again, it's a guide. But with natural light, with constant light, you are getting, this is how it's going to look in camera.
100%. For someone that's starting out, this is a really easy way to see how the shadows are going to appear on your subject. It's kind of like when we got introduced to mirrorless cameras, right? We're able to see our exposure and our composition right at the back of our LCD screen without having to take a test shot. So this is very similar to that. And yeah, the learning curve is, very accessible here to a lot of people. So if you're starting out, thinking just outside of just natural light, the light that you're given outside, or in a room like this, this is definitely a great place to start.
All right, so we are going to introduce our model for today, Julia. Welcome. And she is going to be our test subject for this lighting that we're going to be doing today. Right off the bat, I wanted to go over some of the pros and cons of using constant light versus studio strobes. But one of the first things, again, like I mentioned before, is being able to see how the light is that's falling on the model here. So I'm going to go just behind here. And I apologize because I'm going to be turning up the power of the light just to prove one of the points, I guess one of the differences between the strobes and constant light. I like to shoot at 100 ISO. That's a preference of mine. But in order to do that with constant lights, I need to really boost the power of the light so that it affects her and it also affects the background. So let's do that right now. So once again, I'm sorry for this. So this is the Nanlite FS60B. And you can see, or at least we can see here in studio, that it is very, very strong. So maybe for one or two photos, a model is okay with having this be very, very bright. But after a lot of photos, she's going to instinctively start to kind of close eyes, move her poses away from the light. This happens naturally because it's an annoyance to have this powerful light constantly getting into her eyes and into her face. So if I then direct her to look at me, I am shooting with the Sony 7R Mark V and the new 50 1.4, just for all those who want to know that. And in camera, I'm going to bring my exposure down to ISO 100. And again, if you look here at the back of the screen, live, as I am looking at her, I can see exactly how the shadows are forming on her body, on her face, and I can also see in the background how that light is coming out. So I take the photo, and if I zoom in, you can see just how tack sharp that looks. So it looks gorgeous, but if I were to do the entire photo shoot like this, again, I'm getting what I want, but I'm kind of putting her at the disadvantage of having this bright light. So let's make it comfortable for her. So I'm going to bring that down to about a 40%.
And we should preface this too by saying the equipment we're using today, it doesn't have to be the exact equipment that we're using to achieve these results as well. You can kind of use, you know, the equipment that you have or other equipment that you like using. So we simply have a few different things here today just to kind of show you some different possibilities. But the exact model of light or camera or anything else is not a must, obviously.
And you know me, I always go off on a tangent. So once I start talking about the reason why I chose nanlite, for example, you can see the form factor. It's really small. So for packing this up, including with this modifier, if you're going on location to a studio where, of course, in this case, you do have to plug it in to power, but I still don't want to carry around big, heavy gear. I want it to be small. So that's the reason for nanlite.
And this is a pretty nice size modifier as well, right? It's sort of was that about a 2 foot?
It is a 2 foot.
Yeah, so it's a 2 foot. You know, 2 or 3 feet is usually where we are as on location portrait photographers. They're quite, you know, mobile options as well. We don't want to go out there with a 5 foot octa if we don't need to. So yeah, just a really good size overall. So if you're wondering what kind of sizing of modifier would work, usually 2 to 3 feet is a really good place to start.
Now, in this case, it does have a diffusion panel in the front, right? But again, with constant light, you have to worry about how many layers of diffusion, because again, constant light, even at full power, you're cutting the light with the more diffusion you have. So let's throw this back onto her. Now, I would consider this to be comfortable lighting. At 40% for this nanlite, other lights are going to be different percentages. But for this one, I like the way that this looks.
And you're about 3 feet away as well, just
that's
to
right.
give you a general idea.
Yeah. So I haven't made any changes to my camera exposure. So I'm still at 100, just for you to see the difference here. And I'm going to take this picture. And then you can see this is the first image that I shot at 100% power. And then this is the second one. Now, right off the bat, this might be the preference. You might say, I'm okay with this. You know, it looks good. But what did we lose in the photo? Well, we lost the background. By turning down that power of the light, it was the only real thing that was influencing the background. So we lost it. So now, shooting in constant light, my only solution is if I made it comfortable for her, now I have to boost my ISO. And that's where my conflict is with constant light. I know that I'm going to boost this to, let's say, 320. Now, most people will say 320 is not that big of a boost. In fact, I remember back in the day when I was shooting with DSLRs, it was like 800 ISO was your limit. Anything that was higher than 800 ISO, it was grainy, it had color noise, it looked horrible. But now these cameras do so well, even up to like 3200, 6400 ISO, they look good. So I know I can get a good exposure, but to try to match what I was getting at 100%, I'm going to be at 320. So here, I'm going to take that exact same photo again. And if I go back, this was the original at 100%, and this is the secondary one right now at 320 ISO. So once again, I'm getting her absolutely tack sharp, and the picture looks amazing and gorgeous, but now I do have that background that comes in again, okay? So that's kind of the outlook of doing a photo shoot with constant light, powering it down, and having to adjust my ISO to compensate.
So there's kind of two things at play here, right? The exposure on your subject and also the exposure on the background. And by moving the light either closer or further, which we haven't done yet, will obviously affect that, or powering up or down the light will also play a role in that as well. So you need to keep that in mind as you're setting up these shots.
Yeah. So I'm going to turn off this, and I'm going to bring in the ProPhoto B10 just to show that there is a difference. One of the other things that I wanted to touch on as well is the issue of battery life. So with both of these two units, with the Nanlite, you can attach a handle where you can put some batteries on there. But of course, it's not going to last for 2-3 hour photo shoot. It's going to run out. So if you're shooting that on location, remember that that's going to be an issue, is battery life. Whereas this ProPhoto B10, with the battery pack that I have, I can comfortably shoot the time here even on battery, because again, I'm not using full power when it comes to the ProPhoto. So I'm going to turn this on, and I'm going to activate the modeling lamp. Now you can see right now I have the modeling lamp set to 100%. So this is as powerful as this can be. Now if I wanted to use the ProPhoto's modeling lamp as my constant light, to get that same effect, I would have to get much closer to her. And because of the inverse square law, as Raph was mentioning briefly, she is lit, but that light is not transferring to the background. Okay? So even at that 100 ISO, if I were going to take that same picture and then review it, you can see just how much darker it is on her. And that's the ProPhoto's modeling lamp at 100% power.
So now let's keep in mind too, this is the B10. There is also a B10X, which does have a boost in LED power. So I think it was got from 2,500 lumens to I think 3,200. Don't quote me on that, but it's definitely a noticeable percentage. And one other thing that's in play here is the modifier is different. So if that modifier, if the actual diffusion panel is made of something different, thicker, if there's a secondary diffusion panel perhaps, all that comes into play in terms of the output of that LED light.
Yeah. And so swinging this around, again, this is a Magmod 24 Octa, and this does again have that diffusion panel on the front, but I'm not really concerned with the power because on the strobe, I can crank that up. Yeah. Currently, right now, I am set to 3.9, so basically 4 out of the potential 10 of power. I always find that funny that with ProPhoto 10 is full power, 9 you'd think is a little bit less power, and no, 9 is half power.
That's right. Yeah.
And then the fractions go on from there. Yeah. So once you figure that out, so at 4, what is that, like 1/64th, 1/128th power?
I'd have to do the math, so.
Nice.
Not going to do that right now.
Luis is better at math and he's the videographer, so.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to do a test shot now. I've put my ISO back to 100. I am shooting wide open, so 1.4, which is what this lens can do. And I have my shutter speed at 2/50th of a second. So I'm going to take that first shot. Studio strobe. And there you go. Now, I'll notice one thing. Notice that on this shot, look at her skin tone. So that constant light, daylight balanced, my white balance is appropriate for that. Now that I'm shooting with the ProPhoto, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my white balance in order to compensate. And now I get that beautiful skin tone, okay? But in terms of the power, me getting the background details to see how sharp that image is and the light fall off, I mean, that looks fantastic.
So would you say we're getting pretty similar results here?
Yes.
The constant light and the flash?
Yes. I can say that maybe specularly, the ProPhoto is giving me more specular highlights. So specular highlights is, for example, depending on how greasy the skin is or reflective the makeup is, the light will always have this little area right here where that light, it's like a hotspot, almost like but a desired hotspot, I would call it. So on the constant light, because of that spread, I don't necessarily get that defined spot. So when I say this looks more production, I'm talking more about studio strobes because it gives you that kind of very crisp look. I get a lot of photographers, they describe it in different ways, but the majority I hear that say, oh, that looks crisp. And they're referring to that specular highlight that's just illuminating
crisp
that
is a good
area.
way of describing it. And a lot of times we'll get that with silver reflectors, right? If you're just using a reflector that reflects, let's say, daylight, and you're using the white side, you won't have much specular highlights. If you use the silver side, you'll get more of that. Same with beauty dishes. If you use more of that silver, more punchier or crisp, that's the kind of the result that you get. So yeah, it's a good way of describing it.
So another pro on the constant light side. So right now at 3.9, with how I'm illuminating with the Pro Photo, I can shoot, throughout a couple of images of her as she's posing and things like that. And I don't really have a problem with recycle time. With a constant light, the light's always on. So as long as I'm tuned in, I can shoot as many frames as I want, and I'm going to get the exact same results because there is no recycle time with the constant lights. Now, there are certain constant lights, certain brands that claim to flash with it. And what that light is doing is, let's say that light can go to 100%. For the flash portion, it will go to 110%, which again, don't know how that's possible, but it's giving an extra boost of light or intensity, and it can keep that up over and over and over again. So no recycle time, and you can shoot, if your camera can do 10 frames per second and 20 frames per second, it can do it because it's constant light. As opposed to this Pro Photo, with as I start shooting, well, you might have a misfire, or it might not recycle as quickly in order to get the very next shot.
Especially if you're moving up in power, if you're shooting at 9 or 10 full power, that takes that 1 to 2 seconds to actually recycle. So you will have to kind of time your shots based on that as well, right? If you're battling a lot of daylight.
So I'm going to do a little bit of a burst. Now this right now with the R5, 7R5, right now I have it set to low. So as I do this little couple of shots, you can see, you can move around, you can do some of your posing. And you can see that at this speed, no problem, the flash is going to fire. And even if I do get a missed shot, it'll do it. Okay? Now, I go into, why not? Let's go to high. See what happens. So now I'm shooting much faster per second shooting. Again, the camera is awesome because it's keeping up with her eye. Taking in mind that this camera is doing 61 megapixels, the benefit that I like about the camera, this is again a side note because I love tangents, is that I don't necessarily need to be shooting at 61 megapixels. So right now I actually have it set to 26. So I can change both the RAW and the JPEG to shoot at lesser megapixels. Now, if this was beauty or jewelry or something like that, I would probably want to get up to 61, and I want to get all the details, almost like more commercial work. But in this case, it's great because now I can put this camera to its fastest per second shooting, and I won't have the buffering issue. It'll just, record as it's going in. So now, as a difference, I'm going to get rid of the Pro Photo light. I'm going to bring back the constant light. Okay. Oh, and take in mind, this is something that we always talk about as well. During these photo shoots, we always have music on, at least I do, in my shoots. So for the model, she's got something to move to. And I usually, when I'm doing these shoots, I'll ask the model, let's play your favorite music, not Yadu's favorite music, because she might not like Yadu's Spanish music. Most people do, actually. I hope you're one of
Most people don't like my music.
Really?
Well, it's metal.
All right.
And then hard rock, so it depends on the mood, I guess.
Yes, depends on the client, depends on the mood. But we would prefer to listen to their music just so that they can get comfortable. And as we're shooting and they're posing, they're kind of moving to that music as well. So now that I have the constant light, I'll ask her to do the exact same thing. Oh, I've got to again, change my settings because now it's constant. So let's go to...
And as you're shooting, maybe can you talk about a little bit sort of the positioning of the lights and why you've positioned it in this way and what you're looking for in terms of shadow fall off or how it's hitting her face?
So right now, pleasing, and I know that we went over this slightly the last time that we were talking in the first webinar, so watch that if you haven't. But you were referring to the reflector, and that if you had window light coming in, the window light is directional at a 45 coming down, and that most photographers, when using a reflector, bounce the light from the bottom up as the key light, and then you get this kind of ghosting, you know, flashlight under the chin look, which is not that pleasing. So I tried to think, what is my main light? If this is my main light, I do want it to come down, typically at a 45. I might move it around, getting closer or further away, but that's typically where I want it to do that. And if I was using a reflector, if this is my main light, then the reflector is just to bounce out. Sure. But what am I looking for? So I want you to look straight to that wall. I am looking for this. If you can see, her jawline and her cheekbones is giving off that shadow on this side. Under her chin, there's a slight fall off right here. So that is what I'm looking for when I position the light. Now I'm going to move the light around just so that you can see that there are differences, because if I go too far this way, even though there's a diffusion panel, which means there's a soft transition underneath the nose right here, I am now cascading more shadow onto that side and illuminating this side. If I then do this, now almost that side of the face is completely in shadow. Now, some things to look at as well is she has very beautiful curly hair. If I put the light behind, now that hair becomes the shadow on her very face that I'm trying to illuminate. So those are little things that you have to keep in mind in how you position your light. So at least here with constant light, I can see it and I can say, oh, is that the way I want the photo to turn out? Or do I want to move it? Now, why I don't put it directly here and directly down, it's kind of harder to see here, is because I've now flattened all of those features. And even though the light is slightly elevated, I'm still getting the shadows here and the shadows here, but I've flattened out a lot of those features of her face.
And that can be a look in itself as well, right? That traditional beauty dish type of beauty lighting where it's above, you get the butterfly lighting. And that can definitely be a look as well. So that's what I love about photography in general, is just, it's all subjective. It's all about what you want to create. But like Yadu said, this is a great way to see exactly what you're getting.
So once again, we will shoot. So I'm going to bring this again, same distance, and you can move around as you want. So same speed. And once again, it just can track. There is no recycle time. The light is on the entire time. So as I review and look at that, once again, just any frame as I go through all of that. And that's constant light.
Pretty impressive.
You're not going to get a missed fire or things like that. And because I've put it to 40%, it's comfortable for her. We can kind of work with it. One thing that we really didn't call attention to is the fact that these windows over here are kind of blacked out. We do have a remote where if we wanted to, we can elevate, get some window light coming in, and then we can start to balance this light versus the window light. For example, if I did want that background to be illuminated a little bit more, well, all I have to do is raise that curtain a little bit. That light will influence the background, and then all I really have to do is control the constant light hitting her.
Which then kind of brings us to perhaps some of the negative things about using off-camera lighting, because at one point, we're going to have so much light that these are going to be rendered useless in a sense, where they're just not powerful enough to be able to battle. Today is extremely sunny outside, probably clear skies. If we were to take this outside, I don't think it would do too well. And that's where strobes will definitely be a benefit. And I'll show you that later with my setup.
And then the other thing is, because we talked briefly about window light, but there's also the house lights. So if we were to go and, yeah, Raph, you can go and turn them on, and you'll see that even the color temperature changes in the room. It might be something that you want and something that you don't want. Now, these lights are tungsten, which means it's giving a warmer tone to the room. So do we then want to match that with the nan light so that there is a difference between the background and her in terms of the light? Now, this light isn't her main light. Now I have to worry about this light being maybe the initial key light, but that all of those lights above are affecting her hair, her skin, and it's changing the color temperature. That's one of the reasons why, for example, when we're using BenQ, the monitors, those are amazing because they're calibrated, because I can look at the images and see what the color looks like, and I know that that's how it's going to be rendered if I make a print or if I'm going to put that photo on social media or whatever. I want that accuracy, and that's part of it. Knowing which lights to turn on and which lights are influencing your image so that you don't have to do all this correction after the fact.
And how would we match this type of light? Let's say we were to use those room ambient tungsten lights. What are some ways we could match either our strobe or this?
In both cases, I would probably go with CTO gels.
Color temperature orange?
Yeah,
Yep.
color temperature. Oh, I like it. That's what CTO stands for.
That's right.
So yes, I would probably put some type of gel, and in most cases you have two types of gels. There's the correctional gels, and then there's the creative gels.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't throw like a purple magenta or something like that on there. But if I just wanted to match the color of the room, I would then select like a CTO gel, and there's different grades of CTO that would work out in this circumstance. So yeah, that's what I would do.
Perfect. Awesome. So why don't we move on to sort of my setup, and we're going to kind of play within this really cool jungle theme or garden theme, I guess, more appropriate garden theme. And we're going to use a couple of different modifiers as well. I have a tiny little light that I'm going to use. This is something that you could probably just get on Amazon, and it's extremely portable. A lot of guys use it for video lights. So video lights, little LED lights that you can put on top of your hot shoe on a video specific camera. It is something that you can use as well, and it's quite portable, quite small, and oftentimes quite powerful as well. So let's do that.
Okay.
We'll clear this out. I'm going to grab my lights, and Jed is going to help me. So as he's doing that, I can briefly show you what this is. This is Amaran. I don't really know this brand. It's by Aperture. It's this little guy here. It's got a magnetic, so that's what it looks like. It has a little magnetic diffusion panel, if you want to call it that, and there's some, you can power this up and down, and it is quite bright and powerful. So oftentimes I'll use this just as a kicker light, but we'll use this as a main light just to kind of give you an idea of what it can do. Perfect. So let's keep this on the little CTO gel just as a backup. Kind of throw that in your pocket for me, and then we can use this. No pocket. Okay. So I like this little area here as she's kind of exploring the garden, let's say, and we have her right in there. So Yadu, what he's going to do is he's going to kind of find a nice spot. I really like the back shot. Yeah, that's perfect. That's beautiful. Turn slightly this way for me, just right here. Turn. Yeah, right there. Perfect. Beautiful. Good. So a couple of things that I'm looking for. Now, this light can be close to her, or it can be further. So the closer it is, the more dramatic lighting is going to, the more defined the shadows are going to be. And obviously, the more light is going to hit her face. So I really like the way that looks. Now, we have to keep in mind, before we kind of get started, even with that light, I'm always looking at what my ambient light looks like first, right? So I'm going to kind of go through the steps with you of how I approach a scene. And doesn't matter whether this is outside or inside, it's always the same concept. So I'm looking at kind of what is influencing currently the scene. So there's some light coming in from these windows, right? And there's obviously the main light there. So before that even gets turned on, I'm just looking at, and I can see that there's some light hitting her back and part of her face there. So now it's sort of a creative decision on how much of that do we want in our shot. So I want a little bit of it, right? And so I'm at ISO 100 as well, as Yadu was, and I'm going to shoot at 1.4 Actually, let's go to 1.2. I have a 1.2 50mm lens here, shooting on the Sony Alpha 1. And right now, I really like what this looks like. This is 1/200 shutter speed. And I'm just going to show you the background image, or like the setup shot. And again, it's a little bit underexposed. It's a little bit dark and moody, but we're missing that key light, right? We're just kind of highlighting her back. So let's throw that light on. And yeah, so what I'm looking for here, if you kind of come in to the camera, I'm just looking for a little loop light just on this side, or a loop shadow on that side of the nose, which is quite nice. And so that's kind of my main lights, or that side of the face is going to go a little bit darker. That's where, and the other side is going to get a little bit more light. Now, what I have here now is a composition that is kind of limited, right? Because he's holding that light extremely close to her face. So I kind of have to shoot vertical. But if you look at that, it's a nice balance between the light that was already there and the light we just added, which is quite nice. So let's do a couple more like this. And as she moves her face up and down, Yadu moves the light as well. So now she's looking down, so Yadu's going to move that light down. As her eyes go up, perfect. The nose stays the same. And let's move your face a little bit that way. Yeah, that's perfect. So now he's going to adjust that light again. So we have really nice, this is really why you should always work with an assistant as well. Imagine this being on a night, I always say nightstand, a light stand. And if the model moves her face, now you have to stop everything. You have to move the light up a few inches or down a few inches, and it doesn't get, there's just a really big break in the flow there.
Now, as the light holder, I'm just going to call out one thing as well. Where am I trying to position? I'm looking at her shadows, for example, the shadow under her chin, and I'm literally treating the bottom part of this light in line with her eyebrow. So if she moves her head up, I'm moving this up, so it's getting the same distance from her face. And as she moves down, I'm keeping that bottom light just at her eyebrow. So I can always see her eyes, but that's the position that I'm holding it. And this is irregardless of the size of the light. So if I was holding a very big light with a big modifier, I'm still kind of putting that bottom edge of the light to her actual eyebrow, or just right in line with her eyes.
Perfect. So let's say we wanted to not shoot vertical, right? We wanted to do a nice horizontal image. So if I do that, I'm going to get Yadu's arm. So now what we have to do is kind of, again, thinking of composition and sort of creativity. How can we change this, right? If our composition is going to now be, more of a landscape shot, well, what can we do without having Yadu actually there? Yes, we can probably Photoshop it out with the new AI stuff. I'm sure that will his arm will disappear, the light will be gone. But another alternative simply is just to adjust our posing just a little bit and keep the light coming in from the opposite side now. So let's do that. You're going to stay exactly where you are, but Judd is going to come on this side, and then I'm going to spin you just a little bit so that way. Well, actually, you know what? Before I do that, we can now see the difference in lighting. So as you put that up on there, this is called broad lighting, right? We're lighting the side of the face that is more in view, right? Before it was on the other side, so the camera side had more of a shadow. So let's try that, and just to show you what difference that makes. That's perfect right there. Awesome. Good. Beautiful. All right. Oh, good. So as we're moving there, slightly spin this way, your whole body, just like that. Yeah, perfect. So now we've adjusted that that pose, and now I can shoot vertical, and try to keep your nose now towards this light for the most part, okay? And go that way, Yadu, a little bit more, just not away from her, but towards that side of the wall. Yeah. So give me that little loop on her nose. Keep coming closer, right there. Yeah, that's it. Beautiful. Get your eyes to me. Eyes to me. Yeah, that's it. Gorgeous. Beautiful. So now we can continue shooting with a vertical frame, with a horizontal frame, by just simply changing her posing, which is great. So a couple of things that might happen, right? We are now no longer balancing. We're not using this light that's coming in from the window as almost a secondary light. So we're kind of using it alongside with the main light. So it's just a different way of approaching the scene. But at least now we can have a different idea.
Would you want to use the CTO?
Yeah, the CTO. Yeah, we can do that. We can just show you what that quickly looks like. changing that will give you more of a sunset, sunrise type of vibe with some more of an orangey type of look. So I'm still at 5400, but now it's a little bit more moody. Yeah, that's really nice. Grabbing that's perfect. Gorgeous. Let's say I can change our composition again. I like your hand right up on there. Yes, right there. Perfect. That's it. Gorgeous. Awesome. So because of that light, it's very harsh, right? It's very unforgiving. But if you think about sunset or sunrise, if you're actually looking at it and there's not a lot of clouds in the sky, you are going to get hard light, right? So I always like to kind of think of, you know, if I'm outside by the lake or in a park, whatever, and it's sunset time, usually I'm going to get hard shadows from the trees. The sun is setting. There's not a lot of clouds. I'm going to get that hard light. So it's nice to kind of replicate that in here as well. And that light, because again, it's not very contained, it's kind of going everywhere. You can see it hitting the background. It is hitting all these different plants and everything else, and it's creating more of a nice golden look, which is quite nice. It actually is looking quite good here. So yeah, so just another way of you using something very simple, very small, and trying to do something a little bit more creative with it.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Cool.
So now the next look up against the wall that you wanted with the...
Yeah, let's now use a strobe. And we can actually, with the Pro Photos, what's really good is that we can use, in a darker situation like this, we can use the strobe and the constant light. So let me just grab, this guy right here. So what we're going to do now, what I'm doing is I'm grabbing a couple of things here. This is a grid holder that I'm going to put on the flash. I also have a grid here. This is 10 degrees. So you can kind of see as I move that, you can kind of see me through it. And then when I move it off to the side, you can't. So what that typically does, it's what it's meant to do is basically narrow down that beam, right? The beam coming out of a flash, a bare head like Yadu is holding there, is 77 degrees, right? So it has quite a bit of spread. As you can see, it's hitting everything, not just our model there, but the entire wall. So as soon as we put that on, it's going to create this little path of light going from 77 to 10. So let's do that. I'm going to take the CTO gel off for this one, just so that way. Okay. So right away, you'll be able to see the difference. How it's just simply, there's a little bit of a spot on her, which is pretty cool. It's very dramatic. This is very much my style of photography. I love the dramatic. I love hard shadows, hard light. So this is perfect. Now, what's really cool that we didn't talk about really in detail is, with Pro Photo lights like a B10X or B10 or the Plus versions, we can change the color temperature as well of the LED modeling light. The CTO gel itself, like this one, will only affect the strobe portion that actually fires. But on the LED light, there's a knob there. Maybe Yadu, give me some orange on there, turning the color temperature to something a little bit more. Let's see. Keep going. No, so. Oh yeah, just the opposite way. Yeah, there we go. Yes, that's perfect. That's nice. So now it's a little bit richer in color. We have that again, that golden hour kind of vibe. So I really like this. This is nice, but I think, it's going to get, it's just going to light her up. There's really nothing going on over here. So what I think I want to do is maybe we can grab that light and use 2 lights set up for here. So that's going to stay planted against the wall. And Jed is going to come in here and light a little bit of this foreground for me too. So let me set up this first, just so I can get my settings. So this is perfect. We're going to keep the same settings. Yeah, it's going to be 1/200th. Yes, that's perfect. 1/200th f1.2 at ISO 100. And now Yadu's sort of filling in it's sort of a fill light, right? If you think of that LED Pro Photo light, that's my key light. That's where everything that I want seen on my subject is going to be there. And this is going to be secondary, illuminating a little bit of the shadows, as well as a little bit of the foreground here for me. So this is perfect. Let's just keep that. That's awesome. And Julia knows what to do. She's already moving around, which is awesome. It makes my job so much easier. Yeah, this right there is perfect. Love that. That's awesome. Great. I'm going to move this way. So yeah, just look at that way for me. Maybe look at that little red thing on the wall there. That's perfect.
What's
Gorgeous.
your guys' approaches towards the shadows? Sometimes people like shadows, sometimes people don't like shadows, moving subjects off the wall.
Yeah, that's a great question. So shadows, again, it's very subjective, right? Some people are they want everything super soft and super nice. Depends on your style, depends on the outlook or the outcome that you want to create. Because for me, like I said, when I'm outside and there's no clouds in the sky and everything, all the shadows that I see from the trees and nature are hard, right? Because the sun is low in the ground, or low in the sky rather. It's casting all these long shadows. So why would my subject have all these beautiful soft shadows when everything else around them has harshness? And the thing about hard light or hard shadows is that it's very unforgiving, right? A move 2 inches this way and that way makes a huge difference. It could ruin the composition. It can ruin the way that photo look, or the way those shadows are hitting the person. So it's a little bit more forgiving if you have a softer light source where people can move around this way or that way. It doesn't change the look too much. But with hard light, if you don't have that little loop and you're off, that suddenly that loop is across the cheek, and perhaps it's not as aesthetically pleasing as you wanted it to be. So I think at the end of the day, it's preference.
I think the other thing also is the creativity that you have. Like, we've got this little light, but wherever he'd like to shoot, he can say, you know what, I want this to be a hair light.
Yeah.
So I can kind of get into that frame, and he can move me closer or further away to do that. So now you've got light on either side. It can be, oh, I want that just to hit the back.
Perfect. Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great point, Yadu, too. Yeah, because these are just little tools that we have. I always think of lighting as another tool, right? We all get really excited about our lenses. We spend a lot of money and time on an 85, 55, and all those are important to give you certain looks. But so much of that has to do with lighting, right? Photography is light at the end of the day. And so having these little tools is like having different little lenses available to you. So that's how I see it. So let's just wrap up, and I'm going to do one little strobe shot as well, just to kind of show you why strobes are powerful. So why don't we get some of these curtains open, and we can really fill the room with a lot of light here. And that way we can show you the power of what a strobe can do. So there we go. You might as well get both open if you want here. And you know what? Maybe what we'll do is we'll actually move you back to this side, Julia. And if you can grab my Pro Photo light.
Yep.
Now we're going to be really close to that window. We're going to put you back into this spot just so we can keep things consistent. And now there's a lot of light here. So with this setting, I need to take things down a little bit here. I'm going to go to f2.8. And I'm going to go into high-speed sync. We're going to go to 1/800th of a second at ISO 100. So now I'm killing a lot of this light. It's going to be very moody. And the way I do things, again, now I'm adjusting for the background light. There's a lot of light now. You guys can see here that it's changed quite a bit. And I've dialed all that in, ISO 100, f2.8, 1/800th of a second. So I'm going past my native sync speed. And now I'm turning on the light. My first shot is typically with TTL, and that will do basically through the lens metering. We'll talk to the camera will talk to the light. They're all going to have a good chat and figure out a power setting for me that they think is a pretty good exposure. So let's try that. We're going to do that real quick here. Okay, so it did a pretty good job. It's a little bit too much, so I'm going to take it down about half a stop, and we're going to go one more. Perfect. Yes, awesome. And I'm going to go one more half a stop. That's it. That's it. And chin up for me for this one. That's it. Beautiful. Good. Right, so you guys will see the difference now that we've killed so much of that daylight, yet we're able to fire and create a shot that we want. Now, a couple things we can do is, because perhaps a little too moody and too dark for you, so now what we can do is we can start letting in some of this light in, right? We can go to 1/250th of a second, and you're going to see that a lot more light will come in. So chin up this way towards that light for me. That's it. Beautiful. That's it. Awesome. We're going to go back to TTL and reset. Awesome. That's it. Beautiful. I like how you're kind of maybe walking through the garden. Yeah, just something like that. It's beautiful right there. Awesome. Yes. Beautiful. Cool. So now we've let in a lot more of that daylight, balanced it with flash. And again, doesn't matter how bright we get here, that flash is always going to keep up and is always going to deliver. If we were to place an LED light here, or a constant light, you know, depending on how bright it is, we're eventually going to run out of power. So,
yeah. Well, I know, again, there was no back and forth when I started. Constant light was the way to go. One thing that I didn't mention before is that I started off with constant light, but the tubes, the actual, what are they called?
ice lights?
No. The plug-in screw and light bulbs.
Okay. I don't remember.
I don't remember what they're called. But anyway, they generated a lot of heat.
Right.
And so I would actually put one of those lights, can you imagine that, at full power, where the model and her makeup starts to melt and she starts to sweat because she's literally under a hot lamp. Lamp is the word that I was looking for. Lamp.
So one thing too that we should talk about constant lights that we didn't really chat about, it doesn't necessarily have to be a piece of equipment. So constant lights can be lights that are on constantly, right? Hence the name. But really, there are things that I would years ago walk by and dismiss automatically until I really started looking for constant lights. So it could be wall sconces on the wall. It could be a table side lamp, right? Someone has by their, by their bedside. It could be a lamp on just a table. It could be a lamp in a living room. It could be, a chandelier. It could be anything else that is constantly on. Obviously, we're not talking about daylight. Yes, the sun is constantly on during the day. That's not what we're talking about. But we're talking about other lights that are accessible to us, that are in the environment that we're photographing, that we're able to utilize. So think of constant lights as all those light sources and all those possibilities.
And the other thing is the enhancement to the light. So for example, what I'm doing right now is without this, I'll ask the model because she looks prettier than Raph. So just stand here for a second, right over there, and looking at me directly. So if I was going to use something with the window in the background, like that's part of the composition, obviously from the photo side, it looks like there is window light hitting the model, correct? Come over here, and I want you to see this just the way it looks. She's being lit right now only by the window, so you have this side that's dark. So what do I want to do? I want to keep this composition as my main composition. So if you take a step back, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the nan light, and now I have complete control over those shadows. I'm getting the look that I want to include the window in my composition. And now, because I can see the rest of her face, let me just go back and forth. This is just window light. This is with the nan light. So that difference in power, in light, in the frame, it's just going to look like that window light is creating this light. So in the same scenario that you brought of, let's use a lamp in the background, or there's a lamp, she's sitting on the couch and there's a lamp beside her. I can bring a nan light, constant light, or just a constant light and make it seem like that light somehow has magical powers and can wrap around her face and illuminate it from that particular angle. So it will actually think, when you're looking at the photo, that that light is responsible for illuminating your face when it's not. It's kind of like having a candle. When the person's holding the candle, that candle light maybe represents this much light on her face, and then I use constant light to illuminate the rest, and I match the color so it seems like that little candle is actually illuminating the entire area.
Then that's the fun part about photography, right? You can get yourself into those scenarios where that creativity has to kick in, and you really need to really think outside the box, right? Because if you are using just a lamp and the way it's shaped, it's not hitting the person like you want. But if you have it, make it seem like it's doing it by using a secondary light, I think it's awesome. That's how, you know, we get these epic images they just look amazing.
So I think we've come down to, I know that there's a lot of other things that we could go with constant lights, because again, it can carry on and we can go off on lots of tangents and lots of what ifs.
Lots of examples.
But honestly, I always come back to light is light, and you have to know how to manipulate it. You have to know how it's going to look on the subject that you're shooting. And if it looks right to you, start playing around with it. Start playing around with different modifiers. I remember last time we kind of talked about, why do you choose a big modifier over a small one? Why don't you shoot bare bulb over this? It's a lot of preference. And for me, I like soft transitions. The bigger the modifier, the better. Remember this about constant lights, you need a lot of power to fill a big modifier. Yeah. So my preference might be a 3-foot octa, but then I would need to get a constant light that has the power to fill a 3-foot octa, which is the reason why with these nan lights, you have these 2-foot, this is not even an octa, this is a perfect circle, but you would need to have the amount of power to fill a modifier like that. So again, we can go off and start talking about it.
Of the limitations and the possibilities with the lights that you're having. Every light has a limitation. At the end of the day, even a strobe that's 1,000 watt seconds will have a limitation, right? Because if you place it 100 feet away and put it into a 5-foot octa, it's not going to do anything for you. But if, you know, so it's all, you know, depending on the situation, depending on what you want to create. At the end of the day, this is just another way of using lighting. A great way to start if you haven't really done anything off camera wise in terms of getting into creative lighting. I think it's a great place to start for sure.
Absolutely. So I want to say thank you to Raph for coming today. I want to say thank you to Julia for being an amazing model. Louise, thank you very much for being a great videographer.
Thank you to Yadu.
Oh yeah, thank you to me too.
Yeah.
I did stuff.
Yeah.
And I want to say thank you to BenQ, which of course is a sponsor for this video. Again, I love their monitors. I love editing with it. A side note, I was using a 4K monitor, like a 4K TV before, and I knew that I had to do all these compensations because the way the photo looks after the fact was completely different from the way it looked when I was seeing it on that. So once I switched over to BenQ, it was like, oh my God, smooth sailing, because then I could actually see this is the way the photo is going to look when I print it or when it goes to social media or wherever it goes.
Yeah, 100%. That's important stuff. As visual people, photographers, it's definitely, it's a step that a lot of people forget about. The calibration, a good monitor that will get you results online and offline, obviously in print. So,
all right.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Yep.
Bye.
See ya.
So now it's time for Q&A. There were no questions during the video, but let's open up the floor and yeah, we'll take some questions now.
Sounds good. We can't see them. I guess if there's anything if you wouldn't mind reading them out for us.
Sure.
Ask away, guys.
And Yadu, maybe you can kick it off with the camera in front of you. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, this is the camera that I was using during the presentation. This is the 7R5 from Sony. I kind of mentioned a couple things about why I like it. In the R series, it's the high resolution cameras. And I actually steered away from shooting with high resolution because for me, it was really just beauty and some commercial work that you would need such high megapixels. So for the most part, the 7R4 that I had really didn't get used unless it was those specific scenarios. But now with the R5, the ability to choose if you want to shoot at high megapixels or shoot at 26 megapixels, that really, really helps out. And for the majority, even though this is a high megapixel camera, I'm normally shooting at 26 megapixels, both the RAW and the JPEG. And only when I really need to boost up, today at noon, I actually had a product shoot for watches on a model. And that's where I boosted this up to 61 megapixels for that scenario. But for everything else, I'm normally shooting at 26.
Yeah, I have the same with my Alpha 1 as well, which is quite helpful. Sometimes you don't need all that resolution, so.
Okay, two questions came in. First one, how many lumens is the aperture?
How many lumens is the little light that he was using?
Or it's aperture, APURTURE. Is that?
Well, aperture is the brand name
Yeah.
that what he was using. Lumens, I don't know what
I'd
the
have to look
lumens-
it up. I don't know lumens top of my head exactly how much it is. It's there's a lot of different models of those as well, so each of them have different lumens. I would just recommend just googling the brand and figuring out what you want to use. Pro Photos have just over 3,000 lumens on the B10X. I think it's like 3250 or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. So that's quite a bit, enough lumens there to fill a big modifier. We're using a 3-foot octa right now to light us as we're doing the video here as well. So it all depends on, cost varies depending on the amount of lumens as well. But
And also the same point that we made, once it becomes really bright, like think about it. Are you trying to use a light this big to illuminate an area, complete area, or just a person? Because if you're trying to illuminate a big area and you're using that little light and you're hoping that it has a max amount of lumens, that light is going to be so bright. And again, battery life, it might drain the battery very quickly, but that little light is going to be so bright that unless you have it further away from your subjects, they're going to be squinting because you're literally putting, like a power of the sun in their face. So, again, balance is more my preference. I will try to boost up the power to bring down my ISO, but other than that, I do want it to be comfortable for them. So chances are I'm lowering the intensity of the light.
Thank you, guys. And then another question, what type of bulb was in the NAND light? How many lumens or watts was it at 100%?
So that NAND light is 60 watts. That's the reason why it's the Forza 60. And again, don't know the lumens of it, but again, for 60 watts, that little light is a powerhouse. There are other lamps that you can get. They're like 120. Aperture as a brand also has the 300. These are huge, very powerful lights. They're meant to illuminate areas, rooms, as opposed to just a subject. So again, depending on the style you go to, the price also jumps up with the more power that you would have. There was actually one brand that I was looking at that was actually really, really bright, and that's the Godox FV200. Some of the states have it as Flashpoint, as the brand Flashpoint. But yeah, that light is a constant light. It does need to get plugged in, but it is very bright and very powerful. And again, it's a Bowens mount, so you can use all of the Bowens mount modifiers that can go on that.
In an outdoor situation, where would you place the flash if the sun is right on top of the subject?
Okay. Normally, if the sun is coming directly above, this is where you start getting the raccoon eyes happening. So even though this is technically the most powerful, I would try to do my exposure to minimize how strong that is, and then boost up my flash to be the main light. So you can do that. Again, with my, if I had my flash with a modifier and I'm blasting it here, I'm still trying to get that 45 degrees. So the same light setup and position, I would still use that. And even though we always say the sun, again, depending on where you are in the world, for us up here up north, the sun is normally never directly above. It's usually off to the side. So if the sun was off to the side, I'd actually position my subject so it would be hitting the back of the head. So it would like rim light the back of the head. And that way, this portion would be in silhouette. And that allows me the canvas to then introduce my light as the main light that's going to illuminate the face. That way I have even lighting throughout the face. If I'm trying to have sun here and then put a light on top, again, depending on the exposure, I don't know which is more powerful. And then color temperature also plays a role in that. So normally if I'm outside and it's midday or in the afternoon, I'll try to position the person so that the sun is on their back. That's just, again, a preference of mine.
And that was the last question that came in. I have one. Can you share some information about the studio location, name of the studio?
Oh yeah, the place that we were at is Mintroom Studios. So Mintroom actually has two locations. One is called Mintroom and the other one's called Fereaud. So in this occasion, we were at Fereaud, which I believe is Sterling Road in Toronto, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a great location. As you kind of saw, the way the windows are very tall. I use a lot of natural light there. Since we had the shade down on the windows, but you can see the way those windows are. If you are there in the afternoon or in the morning, that sunlight hits that and creates a pattern on the wall. And it's very beautiful. I've done a lot of photo shoots there where if I'm trying to balance that, well, I don't want that sunlight hitting my subject. So I just allow that sunlight to affect the wall. And then my subject will just be in front of that. And then I'll use a strobe or a light to illuminate them separately so that they have their own light. But again, just as we were talking during the webinar, I try to position my light coming in from the same angle as the shadows that are going across the room. So it's not like I'm doing cross light. I'm enhancing that window light.
Okay, a couple of more questions came through. Here's one. Just to follow up to the same question earlier, instead of a flash, would you recommend a reflector?
Instead of a flash, would I recommend a reflector? Well, I think each of those modifiers has their purpose. So they're very different. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend one over the other. I think a great place to start is a reflector, definitely, because it's affordable and easy to pack and easy to take with you, and you don't need an assistant usually. I mean, you probably should anyway, because it's hard to hold a reflector and a camera. I can only kind of do that at the limit of the reach of your hand. But yeah, they serve two different things. One is reflecting light that's already in the atmosphere in the room, or going through a window or whatever the main light source is. While a flash will let you overpower the sun. It will light things where there isn't light. So they kind of serve two different purposes for me. So in an ideal world, I'd have both of those items with me.
And Raph and I were talking about this earlier, where we were saying, when you go to a shoot, do you already know, oh, I'm going to bring this specific type of lighting for this specific shoot? And the answer for me, and I guess it's the same with Raph, is I bring everything.
Yeah.
I will bring the pro photos and they will be in the car. And when I do street photography, whatever, now if I go onto the location and I see that there's cloud cover, it's great lighting, the buildings are reflecting light. If it looks great and I don't need to bring gear out and set it up, then that's great. I'll use what's available and I'll shoot like that. But if I get to that same spot and I realize, oh my goodness, the light doesn't look good, or it's not favorable, or we want to shoot in a specific direction and the light's not on our side, the ambient light is not on our side, then I will bring out the light. So I'll always have that as a tool in case I need it. But there are locations that Raph has gone to where he hasn't kind of walked through and seen, oh, I like this spot. How is it illuminated? Well, he might have gone in the afternoon, but when he's doing the shoot, it's at night.
Yep.
So the lighting would have changed. So that's the reason why we will go to these locations and we'll kind of pack everything. I have a reflector always.
Yep.
I always have the studio strobes or a speed light in case. So you're just kind of prepared.
I would also think of the aesthetic that you're going after, right? A light, a flash could be in, you could fire a flash into a big modifier to create soft shadows, or you can fire it into a grid where you get really spotlight type of lighting with harsh shadows. So it's about the aesthetic, right? A reflector will only really do one thing. You're not going to get a tight beam out of a reflector. So it's really about the aesthetic as well, right? The aesthetic and the environment should dictate, what modifiers you bring with you to a job.
And then there's the other point if you're shooting at night. So for example, I picture like New York Times Square or even downtown Toronto. Our version of Times Square is Dundas Square. But there you have all the buildings that are illuminated at night. So there, instead of using a flash, I might bring a small constant light with a modifier and just hold that, because then I know I'm already going to be boosting my ISO to get all of the lights of the city in the background to be part of my exposure. So all I'm doing there is adding another constant light to match what the environment has to offer. So even that might be a good combination to use.
Guys, here's a question from Heather. I photograph people with photosensitive epilepsy and can't use LED lighting. Do you have a preferred light that accommodates high wattage incandescent bulbs?
Ooh. It's a great question. Yeah, we've kind of all moved away from that technology, right? I mean, it's all LEDs now, and yeah, that's quite a unique situation. I don't think I have any recommendations that I can. I don't know enough about that technology. I don't know if you do.
For me, the only thing that comes to mind is, as we were talking about before, is available natural light. If there is something that, a person cannot be in front of a certain type of light, or a studio strobe would be affecting them in some way.
I also remember too, back in the day, I used to have incandescent or they were light bulbs. They weren't LEDs, and they were, I guess, more blue for more of a daylight balance. They were specialized photography bulbs. I don't know where you would get them nowadays, but I'd have a modifier, almost like a hard reflector, let's say like a 2-inch metal octabox, where you had a place to screw in 3 of those daylight balanced bulbs, and then you'd put a diffusion panel on top of that, and that would serve as a constant light source. And again, that's probably something from the early, 90s, late 80s, or even earlier than that. So
I would look into like Westcott. I think Westcott has their older system TD6s.
okay,
Those were those types of
Yeah.
bulbs that again, they were not LEDs, they were in fact bulbs, and the TD6s just meant that there were 6 sockets
I know what you're
for different bulbs. So that might be something.
Yeah.
The only thing about those ones is that needed to be plugged in, so it was not battery powered.
Right.
And each bulb, by the way, was expensive. Like each bulb was about $80 to get. So
Yeah, I think your best bet is kind of used market and maybe vintage photography stores or like photography meets and stuff like that, or where it's gear swap type of stuff. I don't know. That might be your best bet.
Joe Ross has a question for you, Raph. Do you ever use constant light during your wedding events?
Yeah, definitely. I use constant light during wedding events. Yeah, I think if the situation warrants it, definitely. Let's say we're in a darker venue. I've been to venues where it's candlelight during dinner. Very, very. We're in a wine cellar or something like that at a winery. There's very little ambient light. So yeah, there's no need to strobe and flash everything. We are just going to be very selective, where we put the light, and it's definitely going to be LED. We can control the color temperature, and we can now also with ProPhoto, I can utilize all my modifiers and then just utilize the LED component of that system and still use all the light shaping tools that it has. So yeah, definitely. Again, there's a place and a time to use that. Obviously, if it's a outside golf course wedding at noon and I have a wedding party of 8, they're not, those lights are not going to do very much, and I'm going to need to use strobes, but certainly have used them if the situation warrants it.
yeah, and I've used them as well on the dance floor. They have these little square lights that even just holding it and shooting with one hand, and I can kind of just move that constant light around. because again, you're trying to capture the ambiance of that. And in some cases, not every time, but in some cases, some of the wedding parties will tell you, you know what, we don't want to see like strobes just going off all the time. Sometimes for the dance floor, you'll have some photographers that will put 2 poles up on either side of the dance floor to constantly be shooting to the floor as they're taking photographs. So some people will find that to be annoying. So I'll just go around with a constant light in one hand and take pictures like that.
Question for each of you. What software do you use in post edit after a shoot before either photos are printed or published somewhere?
So I myself, I use Adobe. I kind of started using Photoshop and Lightroom as the 2 that I personally use. Is that the same?
Yeah, it's the same for me for big wedding, big files, a lot of files. The management is quite good on Adobe Lightroom, applying things across multiple photos and just keeping things organized in catalogs. So that seems to work well. Photoshop for any kind of minor, retouching. And I do use Capture One for tethering. And I did give Capture One a really good try years ago to try to do wedding photography. Just I didn't find it as intuitive or in terms of organization, at least. It's an amazing piece of software, and I think sometimes it renders raw files even better than Lightroom does. But you just have to pick, what works for you. And I've just been using Lightroom since I started, so this is just what I continue using, with the exception of being tethered into during headshot sessions like that. I'll use Capture One.
And then let's take one final question. How do you click a long exposure on a dance floor for light streaks?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
How do you click a long exposure on a dance floor for light streaks?
So if I'm understanding that correctly, it has to do with rear curtain sync, right? Where you're slowing down a shutter speed at, maybe 1/5 of a second, 1/15. You're letting the ambient light and the movement of your camera blur some things, blur the ambient light that's there, creating streams and different things. And then you pop the flash at the very end of that exposure to freeze whatever's in front of you. So that's how I would do it. It's a bit gimmicky. I wouldn't shoot an entire dance floor with that method personally. It's just another way to give, your client something a little bit different, perhaps. Hopefully that's what you're talking about. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's just about slowing down your shutter speed, getting the ambient in, moving the camera, creating that movement, and then firing that flash on your second curtain to be able to freeze, your subject that's in the middle of their signature dance move, let's say.
All right, guys, that's the last of the questions. On behalf of BenQ, huge thank you to both of you, and the model, the cameraman, all the editing hours you put in. Great work as usual, and I'm excited for more. Maybe we'll see you again in the fall and the winter. We always love having you on the IQ Killer webinar series.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We love doing them. So yeah, see you next time for sure.
Definitely, and thank you everyone for attending. Have a great night.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.